Meeting of the Pennichuck Water Special Committee, July 18th at 7 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call. Excuse me. Would you please take a roll call?
Absolutely. Alderman O'Brien.
Present.
Alderman Gouveia is here. Alderman Jetty.
Here.
Alderman Moran.
Yes, I'm here. I'm on Zoom. I'm traveling for business, and I'm currently in my Vancouver, Washington office. I'm alone, and my kids are in the office next door.
Thank you. Alderman Clee.
I am here.
You have 5 present.
Thank you, and none absent. Also in attendance is Mr. Boisvert, Mr. Torres, and when he comes up, I will have him introduce the rest of his group. So, is there anybody here for public comment? Seeing none. Communications?
From John Boisvert, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Engineer Pennichuck, in regard to Pennichuck Corporation quarterly report to the sole shareholder for the quarter ended March 31, 2024.
There being no objection, I accept the communications and I will place them on file. Unfinished business.
There is none.
New business resolutions.
R-24-064, authorizing Pennichuck Corporation and Pennichuck Water Incorporated to borrow funds from the state of New Hampshire PFAS Remediation and Grant Fund. And I will make a motion to recommend final passage.
Thank you. Mr. Boisvert, would you and your group like to come up?
What I'll do right now is I'll allow the project team, this is our project team, Chris County, our Director of...
Please have a
Yep,
seat.
have a seat.
Yeah, please come have a seat.
You- and
We
you
have
know-
plenty of empties.
You know Mr. Torres, George Torres, our
Yes.
Chief Financial Officer, and the new face here is Hannah Marshall,
Okay.
our engineer for the project, and they'll be able to work through the financing part of
Have a
this.
seat, I don't bite.
Yeah. So,
If you'd like to have a seat as well, Mr. Boisvert,
sure, I'll
please.
come over there and keep Chris company, and
Okay.
we'll go from there. But this is the project team that will get you all the answers.
Thank you so much. Before we start with the questions from the group here, I do have just a couple questions, if you will indulge me for a little bit. What is the interest rate on this? Do we know?
So, thank you for having us this evening.
And please, if you would, before you speak, say your name.
George Torres, Chief Financial Officer of Pennichuck.
Thank you.
So, the loan that's currently being proposed is a 20-year unsecured note provided by the New Hampshire DES PFAS Remediation Grant and Loan Fund, which was established under RSA 485H10 to address PFAS remediation contamination issues. This loan that we're seeking your approval on has been approved by both the Pennichuck parent and PWW boards back in February. What we are requesting is a loan up to $11.45 million for upgrades at our water treatment facility, which Chris County is more than qualified here to talk about. I'll talk about the financing end, and I'll turn it over to Chris for any specific questions about the project itself. The note, interestingly enough, it's a 1% during construction period. So right now, we're estimating less than 2 years, about a year and a half, I think, or a little over that. Once upon completion of the project, it then converts into a term note. The current rate right now that's being offered is 3.5% on that note, which is very advantageous, not only for the company, but also for our customers as well. When you want to look at it in comparison to if we had to go out to the market, commercial paper, you're probably looking at 7.5%. When you compare it to bonds, the most recent bonding event we completed in April of this year, we closed on a 30-year bond at 5.5%. So it's 200 basis points lower than what you would even obtain from bonds. Moreover, the cost associated with closing on a note like this runs into tens of thousands. We're probably looking at about $10,000 to $12,000, and most of that's related to legal costs and review, and on both sides that we would be on the hook for. When you look at it in comparison to bonds, you're running several $100,000. The last bonds that we completed closing costs amounted to about $240,000. So there's a marked difference between this type of loan and whether we had an opportunity to bond or even seek commercial funds for this. So the only other thing I can offer up right now is that we are currently under a review by the PUC. We filed a petition back July 3rd, I believe, is when we filed that petition. And at that point, once we do receive, hopefully, the city approval, that will be submitted as part of the docket for PUC approval. And that's basically all I have as far as the note itself, unless you guys have any questions, and then I'll turn it over to Chris.
I was going to ask, yeah, Mr. County, if he would add more to it.
Sure. Chris County, Director of Operations, Pennichuck Water Works, 1 Edith Ave, Nashua, New Hampshire. Only Nashua residents say. I'll give a brief history of how we came to this point, and then rather than try to present too much detailed information, I'll allow for you to ask questions if you wish. The plant that we're talking about, the water treatment plant on Concord Street, that was built in 1980 on the facilities that we had occupied since 1852. Up until 1980, it was an untreated surface water supply. And then due to changes in federal regulations for drinking water standards, the plant was built in that 79-80 timeframe. In the early 2000s, the regulations changed, the federal drinking water regulations changed, and we had to address those regulations. And at that time, we discovered that we didn't have the tools available to us in that facility to address those and to really have some good tools available for redundancy and so forth to address those new regulations. We had a project that was contemplated between 2003 and 2009. The construction was completed then, and we basically rebuilt the treatment plant. And that was about a $40 to $45 million project at the time, and it gave us tools and replaced aging equipment in that facility to be able to treat current standards in anticipation of future standards. Some of the chemical feed systems that were sized in that project were based on historical records of usage of chemicals. And so we didn't have, and frankly, we didn't have the history that we have now to demonstrate truly what we would anticipate under all conditions to treat the water that we have to in order to meet the standards. The plant was, runs fine and is running fine, but we do have, believe it or not, that project that was completed in 2009, portion of it was 2006, which was part of this upgrade, is approaching 20 years, and technology lifespan for chemical feed equipment and control equipment is coming of age, as is the conditions of the storage tanks themselves. Generally, the poly storage tanks that store the chemicals that we use last 20 to 25 years. We've also, I'm sure you've all heard of the new federal regulation regarding PFAS chemicals in drinking water. That's something that has impacted us. We are using as our two primary sources of supply the Merrimack River and the Pennichuck Brook system. From those two primary sources of supply, we can provide all the water necessary to treat up to 32 million gallons of water a day. That's the plant's capacity. We can get 20 million gallons a day from the river and 12 to 13 from the pond system. The pond system has been impacted by PFAS chemicals, in particular PFOA. We see raw water levels of PFOA that exceed the current New Hampshire state standard of 12 parts per trillion, and also will certainly exceed the new federal standard of 4 parts per trillion. We have treatment within the plant that removes that, but we choose to extend the lifetime of that filter media by utilizing the river, the Merrimack River, predominantly, in particularly in the summertime and also in the wintertime, because that level of PFOA has tended to be, that's that PFAS chemical concern, has tended to be in the 3 to 6 part per trillion range. Okay, so we're extending the life of our carbon filters at the treatment plant, which is about a $2 to $2.5 million expense every time we change out that carbon. So we want to extend the life of that. The nature of the water in the Merrimack River and what we've seen trending from the Pennichuck Brook system, and also gathering more information, require us to use more of a certain chemical that is important in the process. It's our coagulant chemical. It's called ferric chloride. And what it does is it removes organic matter, natural organic matter that is in the raw water. It's natural. It's not a contaminant. But we need to remove that, or as best we can, in order to prevent what's called disinfection byproducts. So when we add our chlorine, which we all sometimes hear about as folks do detect that taste in the distribution system, that's our primary disinfectant. And in the presence of certain types of natural organic matter, will react to form a suite of disinfection byproducts that are regulated through the federal drinking water standards. And so in order for us to do that, we use this coagulant chemical. What was contemplated in the upgrades that happened in the mid-2000s, that's how the chemical feed systems were sized. What we found in the time since is that that's appropriate, but there are times when we exceed that. So where the pumping capacity, the chemical feed pumping equipment that feeds this chemical into the process, we're having to where we're closer to the maximum flow of those pumps in order to feed the amount of chemical that we need. Secondly, we've also found that we are having in certain times of the year 3 tanker truck loads of this product, the ferric chloride, being delivered at our facility a week in the summertime, sometimes more. The general rule of thumb, it's a 10-state standard, says that you should have 30 days supply of chemical in storage, in your bulk storage capacity, in order to mitigate circumstances that may disrupt the supply chain, manufacturing issues, and so forth. This was really kind of made evident to us through COVID, as you can imagine, with all the other things that kind of trickled down through that period, where we had difficulty getting the chemical that was coming across the border from Canada. And so we were certain occasions and circumstances where we were down to literally the last 1,000 gallons of chemical that we had, and scrambling around to get a tanker truck delivery. So it prompted us to seek the services of an engineering firm. We went for a request for proposals from a number of engineering firms to do a complete evaluation of our chemical feed and storage facilities throughout the entire plant, do an evaluation, determine whether or not we have sufficient capacity in the bulk storage tanks based on the better water quality history that we've had, and in anticipation of future trends in water quality. And from that came a project that will add an additional building, increase our storage capacity for ferric chloride. It'll bring our capacity for that chemical to about 30,000 gallons of stored product on hand, and that'll give us that 30-day supply. It also replaces the sodium hypochlorite tanks that have come of age. Sodium hypochlorite is bleach, and it's our primary disinfectant, and it's very corrosive to materials that it is stored in, and so those tanks have been leaking for quite some time. And also the configuration of those tanks in the existing facility are such that one single tank cannot accommodate a full truckload, which is also a kind of design parameter that is a general rule of thumb. And so this project will build a new building adjacent to the treatment plant, add additional chemical storage for the ferric chloride, and will replace the existing storage facilities for the sodium hypochlorite. It'll give us an additional space for a second tank should we require it in the future. So it gives us a little bit area to expand. The plant itself is pretty tight. All these tanks are shoehorned into their spaces. So there's really no room for expansion within the existing facility. The project is contemplated to, well, right now we're in design, anticipating that we'll be approved for the financing. We should be going to bid in mid-2025 or late '25 construction to begin, and then for it to be wrapped up in 2026, so that we can have this in service by the, really summertime is where we have our most difficulty in supply chain issues and keeping the tanks full.
Thank you. And you actually answered a question that I was going to ask, just being a cranky person in all this heat. My question was going to be to you, and you did answer it by, we have no choice. What would happen if the Board of Aldermen said no? Because I think that's a question that we get a lot from our constituents. You always say yes, you always approve everything. Why are you even there? Why do this? And I think you answered that question. If we don't, we're in dire straits.
Yeah, we're not gonna have the tools, and so the risk is that we don't have this chemical to treat the water properly, and it could risk, health.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions? Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you went through the historical aspects of the Pennichuck, I'm very disappointed being a former firefighter. You did not mention the fire.
Well, that was,
I mean, that had to be,
well, I'll tell you, it was, well, I'll tell you a little story about the fire. I joined the company in 1990, in July of 1991. And that fire happened in December, I believe, of 1990. And I
Yeah.
remember I had my application in to get into the company, because my mother-in-law knew Mo Orell, and she said, oh, it's a good company to work for, you ought to, and so I called Mo Orell, and he gave my name. But I said, oh, I'm not gonna get a job there, it just burnt down when I saw it.
but people say, what would happen? We were actually supplying Amherst, if memory suits me, trying to get water out to them. But my question is to Mr. Torres. Being a former state rep, I know things are kind of flexible up there. And is this code hard number? I mean, when we sign on this, it will be this in perpetuum until the loan is paid off? Or are we perhaps maybe in the future looking at a future legislature that may, that there may be a different change of this attitude?
So good question. I can answer part of that. The second part, I'm not aware of any legislation regarding this.
Right,
I do
there's
know
none
the
as of
RSA.
yet that I
Yeah.
know of, right?
So the loan itself, if you look at the documents, it states up to 11.45 million. Doesn't mean we're going to borrow that much. What we had to do was build enough cushion in there that if it exceeded the project cost, that we're well within our approvals to still complete the loan. I think the current estimates, and I would defer to the team here, are well below $11.45 million, but that is what our authorization is to right now. And one thing I want to add, I think one of the questions that was raised earlier was the rate. As I mentioned before, it's 1% during construction costs. We do have the option to capitalize that and reterm it upon completion of the project, so we do have that availability as well. As far as the 3.5%, that's the current quoted rate from DES. They do have authority to change that rate, but that's the rate that was given to us now. But again, even if it does change, it's going to be well below market values and well below bonding, anything that we could ever go out outside of this fund that was made available.
George, I think also, could I just add, John Boisvert?
Just say your name.
Yep, John Boisvert, Chief Executive Officer. This is a fixed interest loan. It won't change. Now, there have been times where we have taken out similar state loans, like state revolving fund, where you might have been quoted a percentage of, let's say, 2.5%. But in August, if you didn't take the loan yet and it went down, they would offer you the lower rate. But if it was 2.5 and it went up, you would still be guaranteed the 2.5, because that's what all of your funding was, approvals and everything would be based on.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification, because it's not a variable rate loan. It's a fixed rate. Once we close on this, whatever the stated rate is at that time, and if it just so happens to be 3.5%, it's going to be 3.5% over the 240 months repayment.
Yes, please.
Follow up. What I'm concerned at, Nashua is attuned to this. We are a leader in the state anyways. I don't know what the other banana wackies are all doing up there, but there's, 399 better attitudes than I had. But, I'll compliment, I'll reach it in the back. But, until they get enlightened with this, and and again, let's talk about this chlorine tank. They have a life expectancy. That if we don't actually do this, there's gonna be a truck that's gonna come up and some driver's gonna say, no way, Jose, am I gonna fill this pup up? Because I'm not gonna accept the liability of a chemical spill. So there is a brick wall at the end of the street here. So you gotta be attuned to it, so. I'm gonna support this, absolutely, yeah.
Are there any other questions? Alderman Jay.
Thank you. So, we've all been, I think all of us have been aware of the publicity about these problems with PFAS and the PFOA. And I think the last time you were here, you told us that the I guess it was the federal government is lowering the acceptable amount of PFOAs that we can have in the water. So when we're done with this project, will we be delivering water to our customers that is well below that recommended level?
So Chris County Director of Water, Director of Operations, used to be Water Supply. We currently are meeting the new federal standard. So we've been committed since this became an issue in the region through Merrimack, in particular, and Portsmouth. So we've been keenly aware of the awareness in the general public. Fortunately, we had the tools available. We already have granular activated carbon in our filter system that was originally intended to address taste and odor concerns and frankly, to be a backstop for a volatile organic spill on the highway. So we have been ahead of the curve in sampling and also for removing PFAS chemicals, and in particular PFOA and PFOS, to not only the current state standard, which is 12 parts per trillion for PFOA, 15 parts per trillion for PFOS, but we've been consistently below the new federal standard of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and 5 parts per trillion for PFOS. Actually, it's 4, I'm sorry. But we've been consistently below that and will continue to maintain our carbon system so that we can. The need for this chemical lies in not only that historical change in raw water quality that isn't necessarily related to the PFAS chemicals. It's more related to the amount of organic matter, natural organic matter, and turbidity, which is a measurement of cloudiness in water, and it represents anything that might be floating in there that we have to remove. That's a turbidity standard as part of our drinking water quality standards, and the amount of chemical that we have to add to do that coagulation step for that disinfection byproduct removal or the elimination of the formation of those disinfection byproducts. Reason why we were able to get PFAS remediation funding for this is because of the higher levels of those 2 PFAS chemicals in the Pennichuck Brook system. That forced us to switch to where the Merrimack River had always been a supplementary summer supply, whereby in the summertime when everybody is using a lot of water for irrigation, we would click those pumps on, pump into the pond system, and that would allow us to pump up to 32 million gallons a day. We now had to make that system or that source of a 365-day-a-year source that is now directly conveyed into the water treatment plant. And that water is a little bit different in that it's higher turbidity. It certainly is a little bit more susceptible to heavy rain events. We see a larger swing in the organic matter that we often see coming into the plant, particularly after drought. We've seen very historically high levels of natural organic matter, how we measure that in the inlet works of the plant, and that drives our coagulant demand. And so that's why we were able to and at first we applied to the Drinking Water Groundwater Trust Fund, and we weren't even aware that this remediation fund was available. And so we went to them, told our story, and they said, they were very receptive to allowing for us to take advantage of this financing opportunity.
Thank you. Alderman Jettie? Yes.
Yeah, so are you saying that the water that comes from the ponds has more PFAS in it than the river water?
Yes.
And is that because of the St. Gobain plant?
Chris County, we don't know. We don't, unlike Merrimack, who has, they have identified a responsible party. We have not identified a responsible party for this contamination in this system. It's not in line with the St. Gobain facility. And so, there has been some contamination in Amherst, and we suspect that it could be possible that that's the source for it, but we haven't made that connection.
Well, we do see it, we do see it in our tributary monitor and from various things, and if you, what is it, the Witches Brook tributary is where you, at least in PFOA, which is coming out of that Amherst area, that, what is it, northwest
Right.
Merrimack area, that's where we start to see, you see quite a bit of it coming out of that region of the watershed.
Okay.
Yes, please.
And when you say you've not identified St. Gobain as a source, is that because you've tried and you just can't find the evidence, or?
I think when we look at that.
Mr. Bover, if you
Yeah,
just
sorry,
announce
yeah,
yourself.
John Boisvert again, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, there's many people who are working on that to try to identify responsible parties. We as a company, our energy, there's a lot of energies being spent on that. There have been consent orders and decrees or executed between St. Gobain and the New Hampshire DES. There's been Chris referenced that there was a smaller discharge up off of 101A at a facility up there and caused some water main expansions and stuff, some private well contamination there as well. But the fact is here, where we're seeing it in these levels, it's really going to be, it would be almost next to impossible to really point to one entity and really pin that down to be able to say it's this person or that person. But what we can say is that if you look at the New Hampshire DES and their sampling map where they looked at private wells and other tributaries and surface water, it's at these levels of 4 parts per trillion that we're facing for federal regulations. You're finding it everywhere. I live in Stratham and I'm 6-7 miles away from Pease as the crow flies. But yet, if you sample the raw water at my house, I have it in my well at home. There's no fire station, there's no anybody near me. So it's in products, it's in a lot of the products that we use, carpets and flame retardant stuff, materials. It's in nonstick containers. It's in a number of different things. And when we're talking these really low levels, this is really, really tiny. And so our focus has really been is to say we are in compliance, we've been good, and that's been a real relief for us. We need to maintain it as, our goal is to maintain that compliance. And in order to do that, the real big, it was really kind of a surprise to us that we didn't really see this project at first as a PFAS remediation loan fund project. It was really because we saw, Hannah and the other engineers in the company looked at the data, and we really had a problem with turbidity and these other things that are naturally flowing in the river that we really needed to address. And it just goes, kind of a little bit, a little bit fortunate that these loans were available, nobody was going after them, and they said, look, you've got PFAS in your raw water, you qualify, take it. Absolutely, thank you for DES, it was great.
Before, one more. Can you, the word turbidity has been used a few times. If you wouldn't just mind, just do a quick, can you do a high-level definition of what turbidity is? Just so that those that are listening can understand as well. And then I will ask Alderman Jettie to ask his next question.
Chris County, turbidity is just a fancy word for cloudiness in water. It doesn't indicate what that turbidity is made of or what that contains, but it's a measure of clarity of water. And in the absence of being able to sample for everything you possibly could sample for, the what's called the enhanced surface water treatment rule and the surface water treatment rule through the federal drinking water rules uses turbidity as a measurement of treatment technique, so that you have to maintain turbidity levels below a certain measurement to demonstrate that you are treating the water properly.
Okay.
And so that's the basics of it. But again, it's just a fancy word for cloudiness in water.
Thank you.
Yeah, and think about if you had some sediment in the bottom of a nice clear glass and you just stirred it up, it's floating around in there, it stays floating. It's the stuff that's floating around a lot of times. It's these small little things that maybe not settle out.
Really, turbidity is easy to treat.
Yeah.
It's the dissolved organic matter that can be difficult.
No, they do it in beer too, so.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, so the other thing that's been in the news is microplastics. So do we have a handle on that?
Well, Chris County, we have not done any analysis to determine if we are seeing microplastics, and nor has there been any regulations, or there's something called the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule that every 5 years publishes, and this is an EPA rule that will require certain systems to monitor for certain currently unregulated contaminants of concern, and that has not been part of any of the UCMR rules in the last 10 years anyway. So we have not monitored for them.
It's certainly something, both Hannah, and this is John Boisvert again, Hannah and I were out at the annual conference for American Waterworks Association recently, and you saw some topics, and these are emergent topics that we're starting to see, and it's very interesting to follow the dialogue on it and where it's going. I think for us to really have a sense of where it's going to end up is really premature. I mean, I think it's going to be under debate for a while, and how EPA or our regulators decide to address it. But again, it's one of those where we're keeping the pulse on. We'll learn about it, but it's these are the PFAS and the other things are really the drivers of what we're focusing on right now.
Any other questions? Any follow-ups?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Gouveia?
I'm all set.
Are there any other questions? If not, I'm sorry, we have to do, sorry, Alderman Moran, did you have a question?
No, I did not.
We have to do a roll call. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman O'Brien.
Yes.
Alderman Gouveia. Yes. Alderman Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Moran.
Yes.
Alderman Clay.
Yes,
That is 5 yeas, 0 nays.
and that motion carries. New business,
There is none.
general discussion. Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you. So in the quarterly report that is attached to the agenda, in the executive summary, it states that the second bullet says operating income for the first quarter of 2024 was 23.3% higher than the prior year due to lower revenues and increased operating expenses year over year. So I'm having trouble understanding how operating income can be higher when you have lower revenues and increased operating expenses.
George Torres, CFO. I don't have the memo in front of me, but yeah, it typically, within the first quarter, you would see lower revenues in comparison to other quarters, and for the sole reason that we're usually in base consumption months, Q1 and Q4. Q2 and Q3 are typically our months that you would see higher irrigation, especially in the core. So that's where generally you see the higher revenues and higher operating incomes. So if you're reading that correctly, which I have no doubt that you are, it probably is a mistake. It should be the opposite. If the revenues were lower than the prior quarter, then you would typically see lower operating income.
I
Okay.
just-
Probably.
Does look like it does get got reversed.
Yeah, got reversed.
Yeah, it was reversed.
Can,
Our
is it
apologies.
possible for us to get a correction of that?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
thank you for,
Alderman Jettie, that I had picked that up too. I had noticed, I was reading it over and over going, this isn't making sense. How can the income be up when the revenue is down? So thank you, though, for bringing that up.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
So we'll let our assistant know that we'll be getting another copy of it, and we will accept it at a Board of Aldermen meeting, so. Are there any other questions? Public comment? Seeing none. Remarks by the Alderman. I just have one comment. As always, I truly appreciate you coming forward and answering all the questions as you do. And I actually was speaking with the mayor today, and I told him how Mr. Ware had done a very lengthy discussion as how we got to where we're here. And I remind my constituents of that explanation of it. But I do appreciate you taking the time to explain this particular loan and how it's going to work and how it will affect us. So if there's no other comments, Alderman O'Brien, do you have a motion?
To adjourn.
We need to do that by roll call.
Yep. Alderman O'Brien.
Yes.
Alderman Gouvet is a yes. Alderman Jettie.
Yes.
Alderman Moran.
Yes.
Alderman Clee.
Yes.
Five in favor, 0 opposed.
And that motion carries, and the meeting is declared closed at 7:37 PM.